Chapter 2455, No Choice. Chapter 2455. No choice. Yi Futian naturally understood that Saint Jinshan had come here. Yi Futian could also tell how highly the latter viewed him. He would not stop until he took down Yi Futian. When Yi Futian was under the control of Lord Six Desires in the Six Desires Heavenly Palace, Saint Jinshan had merely sent messengers to ask that Yi Futian be sent over to Jinshan Temple. Saint Jinshan's attitude was overbearing, and he clearly did not treat the Six Desires Heavenly Palace as an equal. Now he had come in person to take Yi Futian back with him. Yi Futian did not know whether or not he should feel honored. "Greetings, Senior Saint Jinshan." Yi Futian greeted as he looked at Saint Jinshan in the sky. Although Saint Jinshan was his opponent, he still minded his manners. However, Saint Jinshan was not as friendly as Yi Futian was. He gazed down at the figure below. A cold look flashed past in his domineering gaze as he said, "I never thought that Lord Initial Zen would perish to you." Saint Jinshan did not care as to whether Lord Six Desires was dead or alive. However, Lord Initial Zen was considered his junior, and was a figure at the level of a lord. He had fallen to Yi Futian's scheme and perished. If Yi Futian did not possess so many secrets, Saint Jinshan would have killed Yi Futian with a single palm strike. However, he would not do so. Yi Futian still had value. At least for now, he would not kill Yi Futian. "Senior Lord Initial Zen had me against the wall. I had no choice," replied Yi Futian. Saint Jinshan naturally ignored Yi Futian's explanation. He swept a cold and indifferent gaze at Yi Futian and calmly ordered, "Take him away." As he said this, Lord Blubber's smile returned. He said to Yi Futian, "Yi Futian, let's go." As he said this, two top-tier renhuangs descended and walked towards Yi Futian and Huajiyu. Their figures floated in the sky above Yi Futian as they said, "Your spiritual soul may return to its original body." They said this with a commanding tone. There was no room for negotiation. Although Yi Futian was powerful and could kill existences who had survived the divine tribulation of the Great Path, Saint Jinshan had come in person. Right now he did not dare to resist. That would be suicidal. Under such circumstances, Yi Futian had no choice but to obey and follow them to Jinshan Temple. For Yi Futian, he was indeed in dire straits. There was nowhere to run now. If he obeyed and followed the other party, how would he end up? Hua Jieyu and his fate would be beyond their control. They would be at the mercy of the other party's whims. Yi Futian had also killed many cultivators from Jinshan Temple. Would the other party spare him? Clearly, this was the path to his doom. On the other hand, if he did not follow the other party, how would he deal with the situation at hand? Right now he was in danger of being killed off. Right now at this very moment, it seemed that he had reached the end of the line. He raised his head and looked at the renhuangs in the sky. They had imposing and overbearing manners. When they faced him, these renhuangs from Jinshan Temple bore an air of arrogance. It seemed to be their innate temperament. It might also be because they were from Jinshan Temple that they acted so high and mighty. In the sky, various cultivators looked down at them, as though they were enjoying a show. Their expressions were cold and indifferent. There was even a look of pity in their eyes, as though they felt sorry for him. Lord Blubber was still smiling, as though he had been doing so forever. Saint Jinshan did not even look at Yi Futian, instead turning his back to him. It seemed that he was prepared to leave. No one believed that Yi Futian would refuse and resist. They were all waiting for one outcome. For Yi Futian to disarm himself and obediently follow them to Jinshan Temple. Yi Futian suddenly realized that the reason the almighty Saint Jinshan had come in person, aside from how highly he viewed Yi Futian, was not because he was worried that Lord Blubber could not bring Yi Futian back with him. Saint Jinshan might be worried that Lord Blubber would have his own personal agenda. Hence he had come in person. Everything around him seemed to pause. Inside the divine body of Xinjia the Great Emperor, Yi Futian quietly observed all of this as he gradually calmed down. From the look in his eyes, he actually seemed to gradually ease up. It was as though he would calmly accept any outcome. Since it had come to this, everything else was meaningless. Saint Jinshan, ever since I arrived in the Western world, everything I did was because my hand was forced. If I willingly hand over the divine body, would you promise to let us two leave? Yi Futian asked. His voice was extremely calm at this moment. With Saint Jinchan standing in such a situation before the various cultivators, he would not lie to Yi Futian. Hence, he asked this final question. It was to give himself an opportunity. Are you qualified to negotiate with me? Saint Jinchan answered Yi Futian with his back turned towards the latter. His tone was indifferent, without the slightest hint of emotion. Yi Futian was not qualified to negotiate with him. Take him away, Saint Jinchan mumbled. Immediately, the two Renhuangs gazed down at Yi Futian and ordered, "Make haste." Yi Futian raised his head and swept a glance at them. They were both top-tier Renhuangs and would be considered extraordinary figures wherever they went. They belonged to the group of individuals who stood at the top of the pyramid. However, right now, Yi Futian's eyes were filled with a look of cold disdain. Weren't they relying on Saint Jinchan's power to throw their weight around? If it was just these two Renhuangs without the backing of Saint Jinchan, would they dare act this way to him? Even if Yi Futian did not rely on the divine body, killing them both would be child's play. Are the two of you even qualified to order me around? Said Yi Futian. He glanced at the two Renhuangs as ferocious divine light shone from his eyes. Countless runes radiated out from the divine body. In an instant, the two Renhuangs felt themselves descending into the domain of path obliteration. Their expressions changed drastically. However, it was already too late. Yi Futian immediately raised his hand and clenched his fist. A gigantic hand directly reached out and subdued the two Renhuangs. Beneath the terrifying gigantic hand, the two of them did not have the strength to free themselves at all. Presumptuous! A cultivator in the air chided angrily. Yi Futian actually dared to resist and attack the Renhuangs who were to lead him away. Was he seeking his own death? Under such circumstances, Yi Futian was actually still resisting? By following them, there was at least a chance for a different ending for him. However, he was now resisting. Even if he was not concerned about himself, had he not considered the well-being of his woman? Saint Jinchan also turned around. He clearly had not imagined that Yi Futian would resist now. I told you that everything that I have done since I came to Six Desires Heaven was because I was forced to, Yi Futian said in a voice as cold as ice. He then clenched his fist. A frightening rumbling sound could be heard. The two Renhuangs let out horrifying screams. They immediately perished to the giant hand and were executed on the spot. In an instant, terrifying auras descended and enveloped the divine body of Xinjia, the great emperor. Even the smile on Lord Blubber's face had disappeared. He appeared somewhat surprised. They were surprised why Yi Futian could not read the room and had actually resisted in such a situation. He had even gotten violent and committed murder. Did he wish to be killed? Saint Jinchan's overbearing gaze turned cold. Yi Futian had actually killed his subordinates right before his eyes. Heavenly might descended. At that moment, the space was filled with endless murderous intent. It made others feel as though their spiritual souls were suffocating. Chapter 2456, Destroy. Chapter 2456, Destroy. You're seeking your own death. Saint Jinchan gazed down below, as he said this in a voice as cold as ice. When he said this, he made a grab at the space down below. Immediately, a gigantic Buddhist palm appeared in the sky. It radiated with divine halos and enshrouded the sun. The entire space was within the palm's reach. This enormous palm tried to grab the body of Xinjia, the great emperor. The body of Xinjia, the great emperor shone brilliantly, as endless runes leaped around it. The runes enveloped Yi Futian and Hua Jiyu, forming a protective shroud. Rumble! The gigantic palm smacked down. The runes transformed into a starlight screen, as though the divine body was encircled by stars. However, the screen still could not block the terrifying attack of the palm. Rumbling sounds could be heard as the screen slowly shattered. The gigantic palm grasped the divine body of Xinjia, the great emperor, and lifted it toward where Saint Jinchan was. To the side, Lord Blubber cast a glance at the scene indifferently. He was expressionless. Yi Futian indeed did not know what was good for himself. If he allowed himself to be captured and brought away, he would at least have a chance of survival, even though he would suffer severe losses. He could still bet on a chance of negotiating some terms with Saint Jinchan. However, Yi Futian chose to oppose Saint Jinchan blatantly. He actually killed 2 renhuangs in front of everyone. His act was no different from leaving himself no way out. What he did was definitely unwise. If this continued, it would most likely not end well for both him and Huajiyu. Before this, Lord Blubber had believed that Yi Futian was smart. However, right now he was obviously a bit unwise. The divine body of Xinjia the Great Emperor was grabbed and dragged up. The gigantic palm retracted and appeared below Saint Jinshan. He lowered his head and looked at Yi Futian, who was grabbed by the gigantic palm. In a cold and indifferent tone he said, "Will you come out on your own accord, or do you need me to force you out?" Yi Futian raised his head and looked at the majestic figure. An extremely cold light shot out from the eyes of Xinjia the Great Emperor. It seemed to bear a look of decisiveness. "Jiyu," Yi Futian called out to Huajiyu as he turned back and looked at her. Huajiyu smiled and nodded her head. There was only a calm look on her face that was as beautiful as that of a goddess. There was no sign of the terror of meeting their end on her face. It was obvious that she, like Yi Futian, was already prepared to face anything. Since it had come to this, she would let Yi Futian choose what to do. Regardless of what he wanted to do, or what the outcome would be, she was willing to follow him and bear the consequences together with him, even if the outcome might be death. However, they had no choice in this. All of this was because Saint Jinshan had them against the wall. Yi Futian turned back and looked up into the sky. Frightening rumbling sounds could be heard. The defensive light shroud was still shattering in the gigantic palm. However, at the same time, an unparalleled power burst forth from inside the divine body of Xinjia the Great Emperor. Beams of divine light shot out from inside the divine body, growing brighter. When Saint Jinshan saw this scene, he coldly snorted. He suddenly clenched his fist forcefully. The defensive light shroud immediately shattered. The fist continued clenching, closing in on the divine body. At that moment, the terrifying divine light that shot out from inside the divine body actually made it difficult for the gigantic hand to continue closing. There were even signs that the hand would be pierced through. This made Saint Jinshan frown. Yi Futian could break through his attack? Rumble. A terrifying sound could be heard. The divine body seemed to go berserk. As divine light shot out, the divine body was actually growing larger. This scene caused Saint Jinshan and Lord Blubber to reveal strange expressions. Prior to this, they had never heard of the divine body expanding in size before. What was Yi Futian doing? Right now, inside the body of Xinjia the Great Emperor, Yi Futian's spiritual soul transformed into an ancient tree and seeped into every part of the divine body. An illusory figure flashed inside the body. The illusory figure was none other than Yi Futian. He revealed a look of agony as he howled with a gruff voice. Menacing rumbling sounds could be heard continuously. The world inside the body of Xinjia the Great Emperor expanded frenziedly. Countless years ago, Xinjia the Great Emperor was indestructible after he had proven his way. After he passed away, he left behind his divine body. The divine body was the flesh of a deity. At the same time, it was also an independent world on its own. Outside of the body, the radiating divine light tore apart all existence. The gigantic palm instantly crumbled to dust. Countless runes enveloped the vast space and enshrouded the sun. Both Saint Jinshan and Lord Blubber were trapped within the runes. Of course, trapped along with them within the runes were all the cultivators from Jinshan Temple. Saint Jinshan's brows furrowed. A divine figure appeared in front of him. It looked like the figure of Xinjia the Great Emperor. Yet it also somewhat resembled Yi Futian. It was as though two of them had merged into one figure. "What is this?" mumbled Saint Jinshan. He had a bad feeling about this. With his level, he actually felt a sense of danger at the moment. This was originally impossible, yet he was indeed experiencing it now. Yi Futian actually made him feel a sense of danger. "What do you plan to do?" asked Lord Blubber as he looked at the silhouette of Yi Futian. His facial expression changed as well. He similarly sensed danger. "I have told you before. Since you don't believe me, I have no choice but to show you personally," Yi Futian answered. Lord Blubber suddenly recalled what Yi Futian had said before this. He revealed a shocked expression as he exclaimed, "Do you plan to destroy the divine body?" This was the body of Xinjia the Great Emperor. It was the flesh of a deity. A universe was stored within it. If Yi Futian destroyed it, how frightening would the outcome be? Lord Blubber naturally understood what a divine body consisted of. The destruction brought forth by the explosion of a divine body would be shocking. No wonder he sensed danger. Buzz. Menacing divine light of path obliteration swept out. This divine light of path obliteration was formed from the countless runes. It swept towards all the cultivators present. Retreat, ordered Saint Jinshan decisively. His figure traversed the space with a single step, retreating far away. Right now it was not the time for contemplating. This was a life-or-death situation even for him. Destroy! The divine figure appeared hideous and contorted. It also seemed to be experiencing extreme pain. To destroy the divine body, Yi Futian had to push it to the point of self-destructing. The waves of divine light wiped out everything. Everywhere the light passed, everything was destroyed. All paths ceased existing. No power of the great path could withstand it. Ah! Screams could be heard. Under the destructive divine light, renhuangs were immediately torn to shreds. They could not resist at all. In an instant, they were eradicated and disintegrated. The destructive divine light expanded outward. The area it enveloped grew larger and larger. The vast space became a domain of path obliteration. The divine light of path obliteration swept out again and again. Right now, Yi Futian was also experiencing tremendous pain. In the sky, a painful roar could be heard. Rumble. A dull thud sounded. The figure of Xinjia the Great Emperor exploded. Right then, divine light radiated out and flooded the space for billions of miles. It became a true domain of path obliteration. All great paths were destroyed. Within the light, Saint Jinshan and Lord Blubber unleashed their full might to defend their figures from this destructive storm. They did not aim to fight against this power, only seeking self-preservation. At the same time, a beam of light shot out from within the destruction, bringing along the figures of Yi Futian and Hua Jieyu, as it left the world of destruction. It appeared to be the final ray of life. Chapter 2457, The Darkest Hours. Chapter 2457. The darkest hours. A few days later, somewhere high above in Six Desires Heaven, countless cultivators had gathered around. Their attention was fixed on the field ahead. Golden runes were shining above the firmament, endless and infinite. It seemed as if it was a world of runes. This world covered an extensive area, traversing multiple cities within Six Desires Heaven. It was quite a spectacle. The vast majority of the Renhuang in Six Desires Heaven had been attracted to this place, and appeared in the surrounding area of this domain world. Their hearts were greatly disturbed as they beheld the sight in front of them. No matter what levels of cultivators they were, when they felt that aura, they could feel their hearts tremble. Although all of them were looking from the outside, none of them dared step inside. The aura within was far too terrifying, like an air of extinction. Each and every rune seemed to contain the power that could destroy the great path, making that vast expansive realm an absolute space of path obliteration. There was no other great path that could exist within this space, except for the force of destruction formed by those infinite runes. It was a vacuum for a world. That's too scary. Only death awaits anyone who walks inside. Some top-notch Renhuang mumbled with solemn expressions and extremely uneasy hearts. They couldn't believe such a strange sight like this was actually happening in Six Desires Heaven. And what happened here had spread through gossip at first. However, as the storm continued and widened, the news was dispersing throughout Six Desires Heaven with incredible speed, so that it was known to every cultivator in the entire Six Desires Heaven. This terrifying domain of path obliteration was formed by the explosion of a divine body. A god-level figure's physical body had exploded, exposing its internal world to the outside, creating a world of destruction that traversed endless space to form this domain of path obliteration. Has anyone witnessed that battle? Someone asked. Do you think it's possible? The person next to him responded. With such destructive power, any witness would surely die upon the destructive power erupting. No one who saw it could live to tell the tale. That's true. The person who asked the question felt a little stupid, but he still felt it was a pity. Such an epic battle with no living witness. A single Renhuang took down the entire Jinshan temple. Not too long ago, Jinshan Temple was searching for any traces of Yi Futian in Six Desires Heaven. Who would have thought that it would cause such horrible consequences, an end like this? Now, it seems that whether it was Six Desires Heaven or Jinshan Temple, they were both plotting to obtain the divine body that was in Yi Futian's possession, someone else whispered. Well, it's just that no one expected that Yi Futian could actually cause the divine body to explode. That light of destruction illuminated half of all of Six Desires Heaven, which was indescribably horrible. This time, Jinshan Temple suffered a heavy loss. It was really a disaster. Everyone was talking about it, and with complicated emotions. No one could have thought that a Run Huang, rumored to have come from Divine Prefecture, would upset Six Desires Heaven like this. Six Desires Heavenly Palace had been destroyed, and the Run Huang had killed 2 out of the 4 great lords, with 2 more wounded. When Jinshan Temple came to apprehend him, even Saint Jinshan himself had arrived in person. But in the end, it was said that almost all the cultivators from Jinshan Temple were wiped out. Any cultivators below the realm of Saint Jinshan were completely obliterated. Even the Deputy Lord himself had perished under that attack of total annihilation. Another Lord-level casualty in that utter disaster. Only Saint Jinshan was able to walk out of there alive. No one knew what Saint Jinshan had experienced in that storm of destruction, but they heard that when some witnesses saw Saint Jinshan emerge from that world of destruction, he was covered in blood, barely alive. That high and mighty saint had almost perished in this disaster. He was lucky that he got out with his life. However, even if one managed to survive this storm, it would be at a great cost. Even an existence such as Saint Jinshan was covered in blood and near death. It was said that when he finally emerged, he had great difficulty levitating into the sky. One could only imagine the severity of his injuries. At present, there were all kinds of rumors circulating in Six Desires Heaven. Some said that Saint Jinshan's body was filled with the scars of the Great Path. Some also said that Saint Jinshan's Great Path Foundation had been utterly destroyed. But no matter what, the truth was that Saint Jinshan had lost the battle wretchedly, and it would probably take him a long time to recover. There was probably no way for him to return to his original state in a short time. The news of what happened in Six Desires Heaven even spread to other heavens, especially news that Jinshan Temple had almost been destroyed. This was not just a notable event in Six Desires Heaven, but was also of great interest to the entire Western world. Several days later, the divine mountain where Jinshan Temple was located was surrounded by a golden divine light. It radiated with the light of Buddha, as if it was a place of cultivation for the great Buddha. Jinshan Temple was the place where Saint Jinshan cultivated. Currently, Jinshan Temple was in a state of chaos. Saint Jinshan took many powerful cultivators from Jinshan Temple with him on his quest, and their deputy lord was also out to capture Yi Futian. So now, at this moment, an extremely frightening aura came from the void, shrouded the entire Jinshan Temple. As the divine light lingered, a group of cultivators descended. This was yet another superpower from the Western world. The man in the lead was surrounded by divine light, compelled all the cultivators from Jinshan Temple to bow down to him in worship. The divine consciousnesses of those cultivators swept through and enveloped Jinshan Temple. It antagonized the cultivators from Jinshan Temple. This was an absolutely unthinkable offense that would have never happened before. However, though they were deeply hurt now, they dared not express it. Neither did they dare to voice their displeasure. They did not yet know whether their lord, Saint Jinshan, was dead or alive. If Saint Jinshan were to meet some unfortunate end, they probably wouldn't fare any better themselves either. "Is the saint not back yet?" the cultivator in the lead asked. His voice reverberated within the entire temple. "No, not yet," someone below answered respectfully. The man nodded and continued. "I have heard what happened at Six Desires Heaven. The saint may be recuperating at the moment. As for Jinshan Temple, in order to avoid interference from outsiders, I will stay here for the time being and wait for the saint to return." Everyone who heard this was speechless, but what the man said was indeed the truth. If the saint had been severely injured, it was possible that he may not return to Jinshan Temple for the time being. After all, Within the many years it took for him to cultivate to this level, he had accrued many enemies. So there was no telling how many adversaries were lying in wait. Normally, no one would dare to do anything out of bounds like this. But if they knew that the saint had been injured severely, it would give some of them ideas. Therefore, the saint might not be able to return in the foreseeable future. However, the presence of these people here was certainly not due to altruism, but rather their desire to take over Jinshan Temple. If Saint Jinshan were to return someday, safe and sound, they could say they were here to protect the temple. But if not then, despite knowing the truth, no one dared to refute the man. Ultimately, they could only accept it. Of course, all of them nodded, but felt extremely humiliated inside. But what else could they do? This had to be the greatest humiliation that Jinshan Temple had ever suffered in 1,000 years. These truly were the darkest hours for Jinshan Temple. All because of some youngster. Chapter 2458. Convergence. Chapter 2458. Convergence at 6 Desires Heaven. On an ordinary mountaintop was an ancient temple. At this moment, a man in tattered clothing was walking up the stairs outside the ancient temple with heavy footsteps, and he seemed a little tired. The ancient trees on both sides of the stairs swayed gently, covering the steps full of leaves. That figure climbing up seemed a little lonesome. As he climbed up, he came to the very top of the staircase, where a monk was sweeping the leaves. When he saw someone came up the stairs, he stopped what he was doing and said to the man while looking at him, "Sir, this temple is not accepting donations or visitors." The man nodded gently as he clasped his hands in front of him and said to the monk, "I passed by here because of chance alone. Or perhaps this was destiny. May I stay in this temple for a while?" The monk put down his brooms and clasped his hands together in return as he bowed to the visitor and replied, "We have rules in our temple that we do not accept donations, so naturally, we cannot receive visitors either. I hope you understand, sir. I am neither a pilgrim nor a visitor. Master must be able to see that I have suffered some serious injuries and require a place to rest for a while. I am here because of Buddha's guidance. May I be so bold as to ask if Master could make an exception and allow me to take refuge at the temple for a while?" The visitor continued to speak. His voice sounded a little pathetic. Who could have imagined that Saint Jinshan, whose name rang throughout the Western world, would be begging like this just to find a place to quietly cultivate and recuperate for a while? "Sir, please leave." The monk who was sweeping remained unconvinced. He continued in his effort to get rid of him. Saint Jinshan raised his head to look at the monk. An authoritative gaze appeared in his eyes. Just that gaze alone was enough to make the monk shudder. It was an innate temperament that was difficult to conceal, even if he had been severely injured. But it was only for a moment. All that majesty in his eyes disappeared in the next moment, as Saint Jinshan silently turned around and walked down the steps, still looking a bit lonesome. He walked very slowly, as if he could not move any faster. Someone walked out from the temple, looking at Saint Jinshan as he was leaving, and asked, "Who was that?" "I don't know." The sweeping monk shook his head. Looked like someone with nowhere to go. Perhaps he wanted to con his way inside the temple. The person who came out nodded. "There are many people like this. You don't have to be so polite every time." "Very well." That sweeping monk nodded. He still remembered that look in the eyes of Saint Jinshan from before. It was an extremely complicated look and difficult to decipher. However, he was clearly a cripple who exuded no aura of cultivation. So why did he make him feel differently? Saint Jinshan heard the conversation between the two men, and his emotions were extremely turbulent. He never expected that one day he would end up in the situation he was in. But as of now, he dared not disclose his identity to just anyone. He was once the high and mighty lord of Jinshan Temple, but he had his shares of enemies over the years. In addition, many of his cultivators had been killed by Yi Futian on that day, when he caused that destructive power to erupt. If his identity were to be exposed, and he was detected by someone with bad intentions, he would die very miserably. Right now he was almost half disabled. He needed to find a quiet place to recuperate and recover for a period of time. He believed that, in time, with his strength derived from Buddhism, he would be able to get back on his feet, recover from his injuries, and return to his previous state of power. At a moment like this, he vowed he would make Yi Futian so miserable one day that the young man would wish for death. And also, that wife of his, He Jinshan, had never suffered such humiliation as he did today. Many days later, in the great Brahma heaven of the Western world, in the void, a goddess-like figure traveled through the air. Her face was gorgeous and stunning. She was otherworldly. But at this moment, she was holding a person between her arms. This man was clad in white with white hair, deeply unconscious. However, his handsome visage could still be seen. These two were none other than Hua Jiyu and Yi Futian. On that day, Yi Futian caused the divine body of Xinjia the Great Emperor to self-destruct. The resulting terrifying power swept through Six Desires Heaven. The divine body turned into a domain world of annihilation, sitting right above Six Desires Heaven, destroying and slaughtering the cultivators from Jinshan Temple. However, Yi Futian also paid a heavy price in exchange. Even he didn't know what would happen, so he had planned for the worst possible outcome. He had discussed with Hua Jiyu, and they both agreed that they were willing to face all the consequences. Since they had been forced into this desperate situation, this was all they could do in response. They knew that once they had been taken away, their destiny would no longer be under their own control, but would be under the control of the others. After Yi Futian's spiritual soul urged the divine body to explode, he used that last trace of power in the spiritual soul to bring Hua Jiyu out of that realm of annihilation and escape that corner of the world. Afterward, his spiritual soul returned to his body and fell into a deep slumber. In that world of path obliteration, Hua Jiyu was almost wiped out as well. This time, the two of them were lucky to get out with their lives. Hua Jiyu had no expression on her face. She was only concentrating on moving forward. Ahead of her, a group of cultivators was coming towards them. They rode on a golden-winged roc and flew towards them with incredible speed. Mo Yunzi, the golden-winged roc, was connected with Yi Futian psychically and knew the exact location of Yi Futian, which was how he was able to locate them. Seeing their arrival, Hua Jiyu stopped right away. Blind Tai, Chen Yi, and the others stepped forward to check on Yi Futian's condition. Teacher, Little Ling and the others' expression was one of slight concern. Yi Futian's condition seemed to be more serious than they had expected. It had been so many days, and he was still in a coma. Let's find a place to stay first, said Hua Jiyu. Everyone nodded in agreement, as they then stepped onto the back of the golden-winged roc. The divine bird spread its wings and started shuttling through the void. Jinshan Temple had no reason to bully and persecute us like this. Fang Xiyuan looked at Yi Futian and said coldly, "We will have to decimate Jinshan Temple for good." Hua Jiyu watched them in silence. It seemed that they knew all that had happened. As if she heard Hua Jiyu's thoughts, Hua Qingqing continued, "Everything that occurred in Six Desires Heaven caused a great disturbance. It may have already spread across the entire Western world. Here at Great Brahma Heaven, we have also heard a lot of chatter about that battle." Hua Jiyu nodded lightly and asked, "What about Jinshan?" There was some coldness in her voice. If it weren't for Saint Jinshan, who had kept pressing without giving them a way out, Yi Futian would never have had to take that drastic step and end up like this. "I don't know," Hua Qingqing said. "We heard that almost everyone from Jinshan Temple had been wiped out. But so far, it was impossible to determine whether Saint Jinshan himself had actually died. Some reports indicated Saint Jinshan may not yet perish, but he did not return to Jinshan Temple either. Temporarily he had gone missing. It is possible that even if he did not fall, he might have been severely injured." Hua Jiyu nodded. Under that devastating attack, even if Saint Jinshan did not die from it, he would be so gravely injured that he probably used up 8 out of his 9 lives. His condition could not be much better than Yi Futian's. However, this was not enough. What she really wanted to hear was the news that Saint Jinshan had died. "We are here." It didn't take long for the group to land on an ancient peak. There, they would conceal their trail and avoid attracting unwanted attention. "Let's not bother with things from the outside for now, and let him recover and rest. Let's not go out for a while either," Chen Yi proposed, and everyone agreed. Not long after they arrived in the Western world, they had already set off such a violent storm that shocked everybody within. Chapter 2459 Slumber. Chapter 2459 Slumber. After the battle at Six Desires Heaven, nearly all the top figures at Jinshan Temple had been killed or wounded. For the time being, no one bothered chasing down Yi Futian. Previously, Jinshan Temple wanted to apprehend Yi Futian because of the divine body of Xinjia the Great Emperor and the divine items that were in his possession. However, after that battle, everyone witnessed Yi Futian's resolution. The divine body self-destructed and exploded, turning into an endless domain world of path obliteration. The divine body was no more. Furthermore, it was pointless to continue plotting for the inheritance that Yi Futian had inherited from the great emperors. The determination that Yi Futian displayed made them realize that even if Yi Futian were to be taken, it would be difficult to force him to submit. Therefore, continuing to go after Yi Futian would get them nothing. However, Saint Jinshan was a cultivator of Buddhism who held exceptionally high status in the Western world. If Yi Futian were to really fall into the hands of certain people, it was probably something that would not bother him much. After all, without the divine body, Yi Futian's strength would be greatly limited. He would no longer pose a threat to those who had survived the divine tribulation of the Great Path. At the same time, this battle also introduced those in the Western world to a cultivator from Divine Prefecture. He was a white-haired genius talent who had also caused an uproar in the original realm. However, everything happening in the outside world seemed to have nothing to do with Yi Futian at the moment. He had not yet awakened from his deep slumber. Obviously, the trauma he had suffered this time was unprecedented, even at his current realm, and the strength of his spiritual soul could hardly bear the impact he received. So he had been in a deep sleep ever since. Time passed little by little. Although the influence of that battle remained, it was not talked about as much as time went on. However, the rush remained the same in Six Desires Heaven, as cultivators in the Western world were constantly going there. They wanted to bear witness to that domain world of path obliteration, created by the self-destruction of the divine body. It had attracted the interest of everyone, especially those cultivators who were mighty and powerful. The divine body self-destructed, forming a domain space of its own. It had actually created an independent space between heaven and earth, which seemed totally incompatible with this place. Furthermore, no one dared to enter it lightly, as their power of the Great Path could be easily wiped out. After feeling the power within the domain of path obliteration, everyone couldn't help but think of Saint Jinshan. In that battle, what kind of terrifying scenario did the cultivators from Jinshan Temple experienced? According to rumors, the Lord of Jinshan Temple, Saint Jinshan, did not perish. The news came from Jinshan Temple, so it should be reliable. There was no better entity to judge the well-being of Saint Jinshan than Jinshan Temple. However, he had not gone back to the temple either. Anyone who felt the aura of destruction in this domain understood that even if Saint Jinshan survived, he probably did so at a great cost. He would probably not be returning to Jinshan Temple for the foreseeable future, and would do well to conceal his whereabouts. In the meantime, many cultivators had gone to Jinshan Temple, and were openly staying there waiting. Saint Jinshan aside, Yi Futian was no better than the other man at the moment. Upon the ancient peak, there was a structure at the edge of the cliff. It was extremely quiet, and a beautiful goddess was sitting there silently. Behind her, a white-haired figure laid without movements or sound, but a breath of life could be detected, flowing upon his body. Even though Yi Futian had fallen into a deep sleep, this life force seemed to automatically nourish his body and spiritual soul. Gradually, signs of life slowly appeared on Yi Futian's face. Hua Jiyu clearly remembered that after the battle, Yi Futian had almost fallen into a deadly slumber. Only a mysterious force maintained his weakened vitality, which was associated with Yi Futian's superior ability in self-healing. Hua Jiyu also knew a lot about this, and knew how tenacious Yi Futian's life force could be. Therefore, although she was worried, she firmly believed that Yi Futian would eventually get better. He could heal himself. It was only a matter of time. As time passed, in a blink of an eye, It had already been 2 years since Yi Futian and the others arrived in the Western world. Yi Futian had thought that this trip would not have taken them long, but he did not expect that he would still be in a coma 2 years after they arrived in the Western world, not yet ready to wake up. In the courtyard upon the ancient peak, a figure stepped forward. She glanced at the woman in front of her, and the figure lying quietly there and whispered, "His aura of life has already returned to its fullness. How come he has not woken yet?" The one who was asking was Hua Qingqing. Hua Jiyu turned her head to glance at Yi Futian. At this time, Yi Futian was completely covered by the aura of life, and there were even currents of the great path that surrounded him. His breath of life had been completely restored, but still, he was deep in his slumber. Shaking her head gently, Hua Jiyu whispered in a low voice, "His breath of life is restored, so he should be fine. Perhaps he was still sleeping because his spiritual soul has not yet fully recovered." Ultimately, it was the power of his spiritual soul that he consumed in that battle. "Maybe it is developing in a better direction," Hua Qingqing said softly, and Hua Jiyu nodded. It was possible. Perhaps after such a tremendous consumption of his power, if Yi Futian fully recovered, with his tenacity, he might have gotten stronger. His life spirit had always had an unimaginable resilience that was almost frightening. How about the young ones? Did they go down the mountain again? Hua Jiyu asked. The young ones she was referring to included Fang Xiyuan and Little Ling. After settling down here for a while, the 4 of them would often go down the mountain and walk around the city. The influence of that battle waned, and almost no one knew about them. At least not in the Great Brahma Heaven where they were at. Hua Qingqing nodded. They are still so young, and it was understandable that they can't stay put like us. The trip they took down the mountain was also for the sake of experience. Wasn't that the original reason for bringing them here? Uncle Tai is with them, so nothing will happen. In this city, Uncle Tai's cultivation is sufficient to keep them safe, Hua Qingqing continued. Hua Jiyu nodded in agreement. The 4 youngsters treated her as their masteress, with respect. They saw her as their own elder, which she could clearly feel. Now the group was like family, and she started seeing those 4 little ones as her own. In fact, all 4 of them were in the realm of Renhuang, so nothing could really happen to them. Therefore, there was no need to worry about them wandering around. Qingqing, it's just that your business is going to be delayed again. Hua Jiyu looked at Hua Qingqing and said. This trip to the Western world was meant for Hua Qingqing. But who knew that they would encounter a series of troubles in 6 Desires Heaven? They had no choice in any of them. Now that 2 years had passed, they had no idea how long it would take for them to complete the original objective of this trip. No matter. There was no telling how long my business will take, so it doesn't matter if it's not yet completed. As long as I can stay by your side, it is enough, Hua Qingqing said with a smile, and her smile seemed to put those around her at ease. Since he came to the Western world, this thing must be done, of course, Hua Jiyu responded. She looked at Yi Futian's sleeping figure and whispered, he should be waking up soon too. Chapter 2460, All Buddha's Calendar. Chapter 2460. All Buddha's calendar. Over the past few days, the Great Brahma Heaven had been inordinately lively. It seemed as if it was in anticipation of something celebratory. Lanterns were hung up by everyone in the city, and all of them had a Buddha lamp lit within the lantern, with the word Buddha engraved on the outside of the lantern. Numerous cultivators from the Great Brahma Heaven were also visiting places like temples on this day, and the entire Great Brahma Heaven was filled with a special atmosphere. Gradually, there was less and less talk about the battle that happened 2 years ago in 6 Desires Heaven. It was as if another major event was about to occur, which would drown out all the rippling effects of that battle. In a tavern in the Great Brahma Heaven, many cultivators came and went, drinking and chatting. A group of 4 people was sitting somewhere here. These 4 were very young in age, but their temperaments were extraordinary. It was Yi Futian's 4 disciples. Fang Xiyuan, Little Ling, Tai Tu and Duoyu, the 4 of them. They were very quiet at this time. They didn't speak much, but were more interested in listening. They were fascinated by the things discussed by the people around them. All Buddha's Fest. Fang Xiyuan's eyes moved around, finding this new subject somewhat interesting. He didn't expect that there would be such a festival in the Western world. And according to their understanding, all Buddha's fest only happened once every 100 years, and sometimes lasted for 100 days. It was in remembrance of the Lord of all Buddhas. Once upon a time, the Lord of all Buddhas was enlightened under the Bodhi tree and started spread his faith in the Western world. He was honored as the Lord of all Buddhas. He traveled all over the Western world to spread Buddhism's teachings and bring light to those living within the world, which contributed to the prosperity of the Western world today. To commemorate the Lord of all Buddhas, subsequently, later generations decided on an All Buddhas Fest, held once every 100 years. During All Buddhas Fest, no cultivators in the Western world were allowed to kill or even fight, as blood was forbidden. At the same time, Buddhists would be traveling to all corners of the Western world during these 100 days, preaching and imparting Buddhist doctrines, and teaching people to do good. In other words, during the 100 days of All Buddhas Fest, the endless Western world would enter into a period of absolute peace and become an ideal world. It was without killing, plundering, or conquest. Otherwise, they would be dealt with by Buddhist justice. Moreover, the All Buddhas Fest this time was different from all prior times, and would be even grander. This year would not only be ushering in the All Buddhas Fest, which was held once every 100 years, but also the 10,000 years on the All Buddhas calendar. In other words, the end of All Buddhas Fest would be the beginning of the 10,000th year on the All Buddhas calendar. Such scene of prosperity had hardly ever been experienced in anyone's lifetime. Precise because of this, even though the great Brahma heaven was not the center of Buddhism, the atmosphere of joy was thick in the air. Everyone was getting ready to welcome the onset of All Buddhas Fest. All Buddhas Fest is here. What about the thing that Master wanted to do? Little Ling murmured. All killing was prohibited during All Buddhas Fest, so a recurrence of something like what happened before would be absolutely forbidden. As soon as All Buddhas Fest was here, the Master could do what he wanted to do. This was an opportunity. Fong Siyuan thought of it as well. Although they didn't know exactly what the teacher intended to do, they had some general idea of where they needed to be. No doubt All Buddhas Fest would be a good opportunity, but right now, the Master was still in a slumber and hadn't awakened. If he couldn't make it in time, that could be a problem. What happens if someone breaks the rules during All Buddhas Fest? Duoyu asked. His voice was tinged with a coldness. Many people next to them looked their way when they heard him, and looked at Duoyu as if he was a total idiot. These people seemed to have no idea about the history of Buddhism. Once upon a time, a Buddha lord above the Western heaven violated the commandments. Later, he died in the parinirvana, otherwise known as the Great Entrance into Perfect Rest, as a warning to future generations. That Buddha lord at the time was one of the top 10 Buddha lords in Western heaven. A cultivator next to him said indifferently, which caused Fong Siyuan and the others to feel a slight concern. Duoyu nodded slightly on the side, taking it all in. What if someone was trying to harm me, but I resisted and killed the instigator? Duoyu continued, wanting to clarify the situation. He sensed that this All Buddhas Fest would be an opportunity for his master. If the master did not wake up, they could assist the masteress to do what the master wanted to accomplish. And this matter seemed to have something to do with the masteress and Hua Qingqing. Not guilty in that case. The person next to him responded. Duoyu nodded in return. Thank you. He didn't ask anything anymore, because now he had some basic understanding of All Buddhas Fest rules. Your temperaments are extraordinary. Conceivably, you must be from an exceptional clan. At your level of cultivation, you should have known about these things. Next to them, a fair-looking man in white played with his cup with a smile and said, So, may I ask, where are you from? The rest of the people inside the tavern realized this as well. These 4 people had a superior temperament. They definitely were unusual. But the rules of All Buddhas Fest were indeed common knowledge, known to all Buddhist cultivators. Even young people would have heard about it. These people didn't seem to know anything, which was very strange. Fong Siyuan showed alertness in his eyes when he heard the man's question. He thought that this person was pretty sharp. He smiled and replied, The four of us have been following our master to cultivate in solitude since we were kids. It wasn't until recently that we have been coming out a little more in the world. It was not so strange that we are unfamiliar about some of the things in the world. And he was not lying. Indeed, they had been cultivating in isolation. In Four Corner Village, they didn't know much about anything. Even the divine prefecture was a strange entity to them. Never mind the Buddhist Western world. This is a coincidence then. Previously, I was also cultivating with my master away from worldly disturbances, and only stepped into the world not long ago myself. Precisely because of the arrival of all Buddha's fest. If you have just come to this world, you should have some understanding of the fest, and not be completely ignorant of it. Moreover, you seem to be very interested in all Buddha's fest, enough to make inquiries. Could it be that your clan is also unfamiliar with all Buddha's fest? The man in white continued. His face was fair, but with a strangely wicked attraction. He appeared to be about 30 years of age, but appeared quite unfathomable. Fang Siyuan and his little group were a little annoyed now. This man's tone was getting to be a little too aggressive. What's it to you? Little Ling replied coldly, but Fang Siyuan asked instead. Our elders have not mentioned it to us. Presumably, they knew that we would be asking around, and didn't think it necessary. Is there a problem with that? The man in white smiled as he took a sip of wine, but then he put down the cup and turned to face them, looking at Fang Siyuan's table. In an instant, a terrible golden ray gleamed from his eyes, and the light of Buddha was shining. Those eyes of his seemed to be able to see through everything. And this one glance caused the faces of the four youngsters to change suddenly. They sensed currents of the great path were flowing all around them. And it was a special kind of great path, their own path of cultivation. Buddha's clairvoyance. The cultivators in the tavern were astounded when they saw the sight before them. The eyes of the man in white seemed to have turned into the eyes of Buddha, capable of seeing through everything. Any cultivator would have nowhere to hide in front of those eyes. It was him. Everyone could think of only one person, and their hearts were uneasy. Chapter 2461, Aggressor. Chapter 2461. Aggressor Zhu Ho was a disciple from the Zhu family, one of the top principalities in Jianan City, in the Great Brahma Heaven. Zhu Ho had shown unparalleled talent since he was a child, and was sent to the Holy Land of Buddhism to cultivate. He was the only cultivator in Jianan City to be selected by the Buddhist sect. Although he was not often seen in Jianan City, the cultivation world of Jianan City knew him very well. Now he seemed to have returned. It must be on account of the All Buddha's Fest. All Buddha's Fest was the premier grand event in the Buddhist world. It was not surprising for Zhu Ho to come back home at this time. Indeed, Zhu Ho had completed his cultivation of the Buddha's clairvoyance, which was a most supernatural ability in the world of Buddhism. It enabled its cultivator to see through everything, including the types of cultivation practiced by the others. At this moment, Zhu Ho's heavenly eyes fixed on the four cultivators, still surrounded by the light of Buddha. Fang Siyuan and the other three stood up at the same time, looking at Zhu Ho, quite displeased. However, Zhu Ho didn't seem to care. He was still sitting there quietly. It seemed as if he was not aware of any of it. Natural hidden ways, Zhu Ho muttered to himself, still staring at the four of them. He continued, Jianan City is not one of the top cities in the Great Brahma Heaven for cultivation. It was not surprising that the sudden appearance of four cultivators, with natural hidden ways, piqued my curiosity. What clan are you from? And what is it exactly? Where are the four of you coming from? Fang Siyuan and the others were more than stunned. Zhu Ho's eyes were so sharp and ruthless that he saw the four of them were born with the way. They cultivated in the village, and were indeed born with the hidden way. Later they received tutelage from the teacher himself in cultivation. It was true they were extraordinary, far beyond those common cultivators. It could be said that the conditions of their cultivation were unparalleled. Hence Zhu Ho's realization of just how exceptional they were. Under the Buddha's clairvoyance, he could see that they had natural hidden ways about them. We have to go now, Fang Siyuan said coldly. As soon as his voice faded, he glanced at the other three, and turned around to leave. Fang Siyuan was, by nature, passionate and impulsive. He was prone to mischief in the village when he was younger. Although he was of age now, his personality did not change much. However, now was not the time to do anything stupid, and the last thing he wanted was to provoke someone and cause more trouble for his master. The others understood and followed Feng Xiyuan to leave. However, an aura of the Great Path fell directly on them, as several Renhuang intercepted them in different directions and sealed the tavern shut. Zhu Hou sat there quietly. He continued to drink his cup of wine. His manner was light and breezy. Feng Xiyuan turned to look at him and said, "We don't know each other, so there is no need to act like this." "But I am interested in the four of you," Zhu Hou responded. He stood up and walked toward the four of them. "The four of you know nothing of all Buddha's fest, yet you were born with natural hidden ways, each with different abilities with independent elements that may not come from the same discipline. I assure you, I am quite curious about the four of you." Outside the tavern, a blind man was working his way in the direction of the tavern from a distance. It was Blind Tai, of course, but at this moment, there was another middle-aged man who emerged in front of him. This middle-aged man exuded a horrific aura, as the currents of the Great Path continuously flowed all over his body. He was watching Blind Tai with extreme alarm, but his realm was about the same as his opponent, the pinnacle of Renhuang. He got in front of Blind Tai. Obviously, he was the cultivator who was secretly protecting Zhu Hou, just like Blind Tai was keeping Feng Xiyuan and the other three youngsters out of trouble. Feng Xiyuan and the others knew that Blind Tai had been intercepted. Clearly, the identity of this man in white was more than meets the eye. "What do you want to do?" Feng Xiyuan turned his head and asked the man in white. "I don't want to do anything. It is purely out of curiosity that I want to see who you are and where you come from." The man in white stood up, inspecting the four with those heavenly eyes. An invisible storm of the Great Path blew up in the tavern. Instantly, everything in the tavern was shattered into nothingness. The cultivators inside evacuated quickly to get out of their way. Soon, the only ones left were the man in white and the cultivators behind him, as well as Feng Xiyuan and his companions. Feng Xiyuan and the others had a displeased look on their faces. Just for pure curiosity? This didn't make any sense. With the onset of all Buddha's fest, the world of Buddhism would usher in a period of absolute peace. Even those cultivators with long-standing grievances would not be able to act for quite a while. Therefore, right before all Buddha's fest, the world of Buddhism would often experience a period of chaos, with many people hasten to resolve disputes or to act capriciously. Once all Buddha's fest arrived, there would be a long period of time for things to settle down. As for Zhu Hou, he was beyond certain that these four were no cultivators from Jianan City. It was rare to see four great cultivators who were born with the natural hidden way. It was natural for him to want to take a closer look. When Buddha's clairvoyance was released, his eyes suddenly became more petrifying. He seemed to see through everything, and once again, his eyes were directed at the four of them. When these eyes locked onto theirs, Feng Xiyuan and his companions felt a prickly pain in their own eyes, as if the heavenly eyes had pierced their eyes, to penetrate their consciousnesses to spy on their cultivation. Boom! The four exploded with the power of the Great Path at the same time. Their bodies levitated into the air with force. Zhu Hou was too audacious, blatantly spying on them without reservation. Naturally, they could not sit here and waiting for him to pick them off. "I saw divine methods. You have the inheritance of the great emperor hidden on you." Zhu Hou's eyes were particularly frightening. Just now, he seemed to have seen some imageries in his mind. And just as he had thought, these four youths had unusual origins. At this moment, Zhu Hou's eyes were growing solemn. His body slowly elevated into the air, and his white robes fluttered as his eyes fixed on the four. Divine light radiated out of those terrifying eyes again, looking at Feng Xiyuan and his companions. Boom! At this time, in the distant space, a great war suddenly erupted. It was Blind Tai who acted. Although he couldn't see, he couldn't be more clear about everything that was happening around him. Zhu Hou's realm was considerable. He was a cultivator in the realm of Middle Renhuang. Feng Xiyuan and the others wouldn't be able to counter him effectively. More importantly, The ability that Zhuho cultivate was dangerous and mystifying. He possessed the Buddhist method of Buddha's clairvoyance, so he could spy on everything and enter their consciousnesses. If he was allowed to succeed, it would be too detrimental to the four youngsters, and may have an unfortunate effect on their future cultivation. However, the strength of the cultivator who blocked Blind Tai's attack was also menacingly tyrannical. He was a cultivator from Zhuho's clan, an expert in many Buddhist methods, with amazing defensive power. He was able to intercept Blind Tai's attack outright, so that Blind Tai was unable to break through his defense to help Fang Xiyuan and the others. Zhuho did not look over there. He was suspended in midair, continued to regard at the four. A pair of gigantic eyes suddenly appeared in the void, shutting down this corner of the sky immediately, and turning it into a world of pupil, just as if the world now was the heavenly eye itself. These gigantic eyes that appeared in the void looked at Fang Xiyuan and his group. Suddenly, the auras of the Great Path upon the four of them were completely exposed. Elusive currents of the Great Path now turned into shadows and were revealed. A miniature world appeared around Fang Xiyuan. Doors of space appeared around Little Ling. A divine shadow holding a divine hammer stood behind Tai Tu, and a pair of horrific eyes of reincarnation appeared behind Duo Yu. Chapter 2462. Waking Up? Chapter 2462. Waking up. Zhuho had a satisfying look in his eyes when he saw the images before him. He said in a low voice, "It's truly incredible. Tell me now who's your master, and where you are from." Buzz! Fang Xiyuan's figure was gone in a flicker. Spatial divine lights appeared in the void, approaching Zhuho with all due speed. However, even those spatial lights, nearly invisible, could not escape the heavenly eyes, which saw everything with ultra clarity. Fang Xiyuan's every movement seemed to be magnified and in slow motion. None of them had escaped Zhuho's awareness. Zhuho raised his hand, and a massive golden Buddhist palm seal blasted out, passing through those spatial divine lights. It landed on Fang Xiyuan with precision. A deafening bang was heard as the attack came through in front of Fang Xiyuan. The palm seal penetrated the protective shield around Fang Xiyuan, seeping inside the miniature world. It then slammed on Fang Xiyuan directly. The momentum knocked Fang Xiyuan back a few steps. The light was shining brightly in the space. Fang Xiyuan returned directly to the place he was before. He made a muffled groan. Blood was dripping from the corners of his mouth, and his face was slightly pale. The power of space seemed to be completely futile under the heavenly eyes, as nothing could be hidden. More importantly, their opponent had the advantage of a much higher realm, a gap that was impossible to rectify. It was simply inconceivable for Fang Xiyuan to get any closer and injure his opponent under these circumstances. As a result, he was repelled readily enough by a single blow. Zhuho's gaze fell on Fang Xiyuan, and a hint of excitement flashed across his eyes. Those born with the natural hidden ways are truly full of surprises. The body is the body of the Great Path, indescribably elusive. It was difficult to capture were it not for the Buddha's clairvoyance. He was fascinated by the abilities of these people. Duoyu took a step forward. Those eyes of his were extremely frightening. These were the eyes of reincarnation. Zhuho seemed to detect it quickly though. Under the Buddha's clairvoyance, those massive eyes in the void fixed on Duoyu, looking through the illusions he was creating. Unfortunately, hallucinations and the eye of reincarnation are quite useless here. Zhuho's eyes were strange and wicked-looking. If the young man in front of him possessed equal cultivation as him, perhaps the eye of reincarnation could be of threat to him. But the gap was simply too great to pose any threat. Duoyu felt a sharp pain in his eyes. As he disengaged the eye of reincarnation, he shut both eyes tightly. Little Ling and Tai Tu still attempted to make a move, but Fang Xiyuan held them back with his hand. He looked at Zhuho and said, "Why are you so unrelenting?" But Zhuho didn't much care about Fang Xiyuan's objection nor his inquiry, for that matter. His body was suspended in the sky, surveying the land below, as that pair of heavenly eyes still floated in midair. They turned this space into a sorcery zone. "If you refuse to provide an explanation yourself, you leave me no choice," said Zhuho. He then stretched out his hand and grabbed at Fang Xiyuan and the other three. A massive and boundless Buddhist palm seal smashed down at them, grabbed towards little Ling first. Doors of space appeared all around little Ling. She walked into one as her figure disappeared right where she was. But none of this escaped the heavenly eyes floating above them. A gigantic palm seal cupped in another direction. And just as little Ling was walking out of another door of space, she walked right into the palm. It grabbed her and took her high up into the sky. Little Ling. The expression of the other three changed quickly to panic. Tai Tu was on the move first. But then a terrifying divine shadow appeared behind him, holding the divine hammer of the protector and blasting it down, rocking this corner of the sky. A terrifying boom sound came out as the divine hammer of the protector sought to destroy this space and take aim at Zhu Ho. You have no idea who you are dealing with, Zhu Ho remarked with much contempt. Likewise, a boundless and humongous figure also appeared behind him, an ancient Buddha in white, who now raised his hand to blast out a golden palm seal, smashed right on the hammer that was falling on him. The rumbling sound of pure trepidation came out as the space was shaking in its aftershocks. The divine hammer of the protector failed to do anything to the giant palm seal from the ancient Buddha in white. Go! Zhu Ho spat forcefully, and suddenly there was a violent roar in the void. Many gigantic palm seals were now blasting out like endless waves of a tsunami. They overwhelmed the void, knocked the hammer back, then slammed right on Tai Tu with decided ferocity. As Tai Tu's body flew back with fierce backward momentum, he spat out a mouthful of fresh blood. Fang Xiyuan and Duo Yu also released their expertise in successive attacks. But Zhu Ho took absolutely no notice. With a wave of his hand, thousands of Buddhist palm seals blasted out, sheltering the sky, and cleared out all the space. In a blink of an eye, all three of them were injured in that powerful attack and forced to retreat. Faced with absolute realm advantage, Fang Xiyuan and his companions had no way of asserting the true scope of their strengths. Whether they were born with natural hidden ways, cultivated in divine methods, or instructed by deities, none made any difference. The gap between their realms was irreparable. In this great path domain, fierce roars of battle cries could be heard as the battles raged on. Blind Tai desperately fought to gain any grounds forward, wanting to break through the defense that was hampering him, so that he could render support to those youngsters. His divine consciousness penetrated the great path domain formed by the heavenly eyes and scanned inside. It was as if he could see everything that was happening. Iya! At this moment a long, sustained whistle was heard. It was the sound uttered by some demonic beast. Blind Tai's divine consciousness went to that side, and perceived the golden divine light that broke through the clouds and mist in the sky behind them. It was the golden-winged rock, and several figures were riding on the back of the rock. The man in the lead was clad in pure white with white hair, unparalleled beyond words. Sensing this, Blind Tai retracted much of his aura. Finally he woke up. Now that he was here, the situation at hand would be resolved in no time. The golden-winged rock swooped down as a golden light broke through the space, aiming directly at that area of the great path. With a loud bang, that area of the great path was penetrated through and split wide open, suddenly exposing the battlefield within. Zhu Ho muffled a groan as his body was repelled back involuntarily. The expression on his face changed slightly as he looked at the huge divine bird that appeared, and the figures that were standing on the back of the divine bird. Master! Fang Xiyuan and Tai Tu's eyes lit up when they saw the figure on the back of the divine bird. Their master had finally woken up from his slumber and come to their rescue just in time. Master! Zhu Ho looked at the figure on the back of the divine bird, frowning slightly, and a touch of coldness instantly flashed through his eyes. A cultivator walked out from behind him and got in front of Zhu Ho, who still had little Ling in his clutches. He was worried that the other party would suddenly unleash fatal attacks on Zhu Ho. Buzz! A light suddenly lit up on the back of the divine bird, and bright light instantly illuminated all over this space. Many had to close their eyes immediately, because the light was so blinding that they could see nothing but the light. Under this light, there was a sound that came out, and Zhu Ho's expression suddenly changed. When the light disappeared, the humongous palm seal was shattered and fell from the sky, and the figure that he was holding had been brought back to the back of the divine bird already. The method of light. There was slight disbelief in Zhu-Ho's eyes. These cultivators were far too mysterious. The four youngsters were all born with a natural hidden way. And now there was someone who was an expert at the method of light. Who were these people? And where did they come from? Thank you, Uncle Chun. Little Ling looked at the people on the rock and whispered, Master, Masteress. As she was speaking, she kept her head bowed slightly as if she had done something wrong. She had caused this trouble for the master. Little Ling, are you okay? Yi Futian said softly, with some indulgence. Little Ling shook her head, and when Yi Futian saw her reaction, he knew what she was worried about. As long as you are okay. Yi Futian smiled and rubbed her head. He then turned his attention to Zhu-Ho as his eyes fell on him. Zhu-Ho's heart shuddered when he saw those eyes, as he immediately sensed a strong danger lurking. Chapter 2463, The Slaughter. Chapter 2463, The Slaughter, a Middle Runhuang. Yi Futian glanced at Zhu-Ho and said, And you think you are pretty strong, don't you? A cultivator in the realm of Middle Runhuang bullying four young cultivators with lower realms. Zhu-Ho looked at Yi Futian and bowed slightly, saying, I am Zhu-Ho of the Zhu family in Jianan City, a disciple of Buddhism. In the Western world of Buddhism, those who claimed to be disciples of Buddhism were widely believed to be the cultivators of orthodox Buddhism. Zhu-Ho obviously thought of himself as orthodoxy. He was trying to remind Yi Futian of his status as such and warning him not to act emotionally or lightly. He could feel a sense of danger exuding from Yi Futian, Chen Yi, and the others. But Yi Futian seemed not to have heard it. He raised his hand and grabbed across the void. The aura of the Great Path whizzed out from those in front of Zhu-Ho and rushed towards Yi Futian. However, Chen Yi took a step forward, and suddenly rays of light radiated outward, immediately extinguished their power of the Great Path. Boom! Yi Futian's giant palm seal slammed down and took hold of Zhu-Ho's body, picking him up. It was exactly what he did to Little Ling before. Zhu-Ho's body roared with the power of the Great Path, struggling to get free as he tried to rid of the giant palm seal. However, his power was no match to that of Yi Futian's. The power gap between them was even greater than the gap between Little Ling and Zhu-Ho. There was simply no way for him to break free. In the distance, the cultivator of the ninth realm, who had tangled up Blind Tai, now tried his best to get himself off the battlefield to support the others. But just at this moment, Blind Tai, holding the divine hammer of the protector and smashing it down, instantly the earth cracked, and the sky howled, suppressing this corner of the sky entirely, not giving him a chance to extricate himself. It was just as what he had done before. It was a rather appropriate response. I am a disciple of Buddhism. Zhu-Ho was struggling as he appealed to Yi Futian once more. All the surrounding figures came forward, and all of them were Runhuang cultivators. One of them said, We from the Zhu family of Jianan City. May we ask for your name, sir? However, Yi Futian didn't seem to have heard any of those voices. He continued to focus on Zhu-Ho and asked, Fang Siyuan, what was he doing to you guys before? Master, we were just asking about the All Buddha's Fest, when he spied on us using the Buddha's clairvoyance. He then claimed that the four of us were unusual when he tried to control our movements, wanting to spy on the secrets of our cultivation. Fang Siyuan replied. Yi Futian immediately understood all of it in his heart. He glanced at Zhu-Ho. A hint of murderous intent flashed through his eyes. Buddha's clairvoyance? Spying on the secret of their cultivation. For cultivators, the secret of cultivation was not something they would divulge voluntarily. If the others wanted to pry, spy, or possess, the only way was to gain control over the four of them, which would inevitably destroy the four of them as well. Therefore, it could be said that Zhu-Ho had never intended to be merciful to these four youngsters. For this alone he ought to die. Buddha's clairvoyance is a secret method not taught in Buddhism. I can see that they are extraordinary, so I inquired about their cultivation, that's all. There were no other intentions. Why turn such trivial matter into a major contention? Zhu-Ho was still struggling, but his body did not move an inch. A trivial matter? Yi Futian glanced at Zhu-Ho indifferently and said, Then I guess killing you is just a trivial matter as well. Zhu Ho was taken aback when he heard Yi Futian's reply. Then, he felt the hand that gripped him was increasing its pressure, and his face suddenly paled. Would this man dare to kill him? Sir, he is an orthodox descendant of Buddhism, said a cultivator from the Zhu family. Buddhism is known for doing good deeds in the world. He is not worthy of being an orthodox Buddhist disciple. If Buddha knew all the things he had done here today, I'm sure Buddha would want to take out this garbage himself. Yi Futian concluded with indifference. He then applied some more pressure on that outstretched hand of his. An air of death enveloped Zhu Ho now, and his face changed to one of total panic. The face of this handsome man in white was distorted and twisted at the moment. He shouted, "How dare you!" Bang! As soon as Zhu Ho's voice faded, another voice was heard. The giant palm seal clenched tight as fresh blood pouring out of it. Horrific will of the way permeated Zhu Ho's body, and the spiritual soul was erased. Die! Didn't he dare? Now there is one less of you, Yi Futian murmured. Since coming to the Western world of Buddhism, he had felt nothing but malice. Therefore, it could be said that Yi Futian was in a real bad mood. He had just woken from a deep sleep, and the first thing he saw was Zhu Ho bullying his disciples. Yi Futian's current mood was not difficult to imagine. Zhu Ho aside, he had already slaughtered quite a few cultivators who had survived the divine tribulation of the Great Path. Even several Lord-level characters had perished because of him. Indeed, garbage like Zhu Ho would not be missed. Disciple of Buddhism? Even someone like Saint Jinshan was still status unknown and missing in action. Would Yi Futian care about his status as a Buddhist disciple? Crush and obliterate was the only answer. In the ground below, the cultivators of Jianan City felt their blood ran clod when they witnessed the sight before them. Did he just squish Zhu Ho to death? Zhu Ho, an enchanting genius talent from Jianan City, was squished to death by Yi Futian like some insect. Perhaps even Zhu Ho himself would never have dreamed that he would die this way. If he could, he would have never provoked Fang Xiyuan and the others. Because of a conflict that he instigated, it led to his own immediate death. It was a turn of events that was all too unimaginably cruel. The cultivators from the Zhu family were also stunned motionless, and watched Yi Futian simply squash Zhu Ho to death. No one could anticipate that Yi Futian would be so decisive and overbearing as to crush Zhu Ho to death without another word. They didn't even have the time to react when they saw the end of Zhu Ho. Boom boom. A horrific atmosphere was released. All the cultivators from the Zhu family were furious when they saw Zhu Ho being slaughtered. Several top Renhuang and many upper Renhuang released their power of the Great Path at the same time, covering the sky and sheltering the sun as a frightening coercion descended from the firmament. You killed my son. You must now die. A middle-aged Renhuang in the void roared furiously. It was Zhu Ho's father, who was a cultivator of peak Renhuang. Yi Futian surveyed the crowd, his eyes cold and indifferently, his face expressionless. It's always the father's fault when the son is undisciplined. Yi Futian spat out his verdict in a cold voice when he saw the man coming at him. He then raised his hand to the sky, and instantly, a divine sword penetrated through the space, regardless of the distance. The streamer of swordsmanship pierced the Great Path and tore through the void. The body of Zhu Ho's father, who was in mid-descend, gave a violent tremble. Then, he stopped in the void as a light put a hole through his body. He looked down and saw a sword ray appeared on his own chest. Suddenly, intense fear was written all over his face. No! He let out a great howl. And then his body, too, exploded and pulverized into millions of particles, turning into nothingness as he perished. Previously, when Zhu Ho was bullying Xiao Ling and the others, no one seemed to bother to step in and stop it. From the perspective of the Zhu family, it must have seemed like a matter of course for no one to interfere. That being the case, for them to try to interfere now, they deserved to die. Chen Yi took a step forward. In an instant, countless rays of light appeared on his body as absolute light shrouded the boundless space, blinding everyone's eyes. For a time, this world seemed to have turned into a world of light. The light drowned out everything, including those cultivators. Those cultivators from the Zhu family who were attacking them were pierced through, and through under the light. Their bodies turned into countless spots of light as their ghostly faces appeared in the void. faces that were frozen with great fear. Chapter 2464. To Western Heaven. Chapter 2464. To Western Heaven Dead. When the light dissipated, all the cultivators who attacked Yi Futian and his people perished and were overwhelmed by the light. It was as if they had all been purified by the light. Yi Futian and his people were so terrifyingly powerful that Renhuang simply posed no threat to them. They were in such an invincible position that continuing to fight them was unthinkable. The Zhu family had borne the brunt of this catastrophe. In this city, the Zhu family was almost standing at the pinnacle of all the familial principalities. As Zhu He was also a cultivator of Buddhism and had acquired special Buddhism methods, this gave the Zhu family the semblance of the premier family in Jianan. Considering his background, it was not hard to understand that Zhu He was accustomed to behaving carelessly and with imprudence. When he saw the four young unusual Renhuang within his reach, it was natural that it piqued his curiosity. And when he realized they were cultivators with natural hidden ways, his desire to get to the bottom of it was even stronger. He could never foresee the catastrophe caused by the pursuit of his unwise curiosity. No one could have known Zhu He's final thoughts before he died. He died so quickly that as soon as his voice faded, he had already been obliterated. Insolent creatures! A voice came from afar, reverberating as if from a giant bell. It fell from the sky like the voice of a heavenly deity. High above the sky, rays of terrifying divine lights spilt as a group of cultivators appeared above the void. Everyone raised their heads to look at the sky, and when they saw these exceptional figures, their hearts trembled. This was a cultivator from the Great Brahma Heavenly Palace, the peak power of the Great Brahma Heaven. Zhu He was a candidate chosen by the Great Brahma Heavenly Palace to cultivate Buddhism. Therefore his return was accompanied by several cultivators from the Great Brahma Heaven. They could never imagine the manner of death in which Zhu He was slaughtered here. Yi Futian raised his head and glanced at those cultivators in the void. His expression was one of cold indifference. A scanning by his divine consciousness had already revealed to him the cultivation of these cultivators. No one here had survived the divine tribulation of the Great Path. Therefore, they posed absolutely no threat. Ultimately, this was just a city inside of Great Brahma Heaven. Although the Western world was powerful, its overall power was perhaps only comparable to the divine prefecture, and not much stronger. In the city of Great Brahma Heaven, the most powerful person was probably a peak-level Renhuang. Someone who had survived the divine tribulation of the Great Path could probably only be found in the main city of Great Brahma Heaven. Who are you? And why are you slaughtering these people here? The cultivators from Great Brahma Heaven looked down at the ground below, his eyes cold. You didn't bother to intervene before, so don't bother intervening now, Yi Futian replied casually. He was not in the least bit perturbed. Jianan City is part of the territory ruled by our Great Brahma Heavenly Palace. What matters can't we choose to intervene in within all of Great Brahma Heaven? The cultivators in the lead responded coldly and aggressively. Is that so? Yi Futian revealed a hint of contempt and said, in that case, do you want to try to intervene? The eyes of the lead cultivator from Great Brahma Heaven sharpened when he regarded Yi Futian. He thought him insufferably arrogant. Someone dared to be so impertinent in the Great Brahma Heaven. White clothing and white hair. Cultivation is Renhuang of the Eighth Realm. A cultivator from the Great Brahma Heaven whispered, surprising all the others within earshot. 2 years ago, a massive storm had erupted in Six Desires Heaven that swept through the Western world. All the top principalities had heard about it. Several Lord-level figures had perished then. Saint Jinshan was still missing to this day. Jinshan Temple had almost collapsed completely because of it. A world of path obliteration had come into being in Six Desires Heaven due to that uproar. And the main player of that storm was rumored to be a handsome young man in white with white hair, a Renhuang of the Eighth Realm. And the young man in front of them, there was a sudden change in their eyes, as they now assessed Yi Futian seriously and with caution. Gradually, the momentum that they were carrying disappeared without the arrogant dominance that they had before. Was it really him? And he didn't die in that conflict? If it was really the main player of that conflict, given that he had already slaughtered several Lord-level figures with Saint Jinshan, remained missing because of him. How could a Buddhist disciple like Zhu Ho mean anything to him? Would he care about killing a few more cultivators from Great Brahma Heaven? Perhaps there was nothing he wouldn't dare do. Yi Futian heard the whispers from those people, and saw in their eyes that they had already recognized who he was. This was no longer a place for him to dawdle. Anyone who follows us will be summarily executed without exception. Yi Futian warned them, then turned around to leave with the golden-winged rock underneath him. The golden-winged rock spread its wings, wide enough to shelter the sky and the sun, taking Yi Futian and the others across the void as they were leaving. In a blink of an eye, they had disappeared into the clouds, and their aura gradually dissipated. No one was chasing after them. After they caught on to Yi Futian's true identity, these people from Great Brahma Heaven dared not make any reckless moves. After all, what Yi Futian did in Six Desires Heaven was too unbelievably shocking. What's going on? Could it be that his clairaudience had been cultivated to the point where he could hear the voices of all sentient beings in the Western world? This man's cultivation would be far higher than Zhu Ho's. Mo Yunzi said to Yi Futian via voice transmission. Zhu Ho cultivated in Buddha's clairvoyance, but he couldn't see through even a mere city like Jianan City. The man in front of him claimed that he had already heard Yi Futian when he arrived in Western Heaven. His realm had been easily deduced. His master would be Tianyin Buddha Lord, the orthodox among Buddhists and one of the topmost Buddha lords in the world of Buddhism. Mo Yunzi continued with voice transmission, so that Yi Futian had some basic understanding of who he was dealing with. At this time, many people in the tea house saluted to the monk in white. The Grandmaster must be Tianyin Arhat. Arhat. Yi Futian heard this, and immediately realized the status of the other man must be superior and exceptional. He was one of the Arhats. In the Western world, he must be regarded as a top-ranking figure. Little monk, I dare not presume. The monk in white made a slight bow to everyone in return. Yi Futian spoke up at this time as well. Grandmaster, please take a seat. Tianyin Arhat put his hands together in front of him and bowed to Yi Futian, and said, Little monk, thank you for your invitation. After that, he sat down cross-legged, opposite Yi Futian, his visage solemn and authoritative. Yi Futian could even see, albeit faintly, the halo of Buddhism behind him. What advice would the Grandmaster like to impart on your visit? Yi Futian inquired with extreme courtesy. An Arhat came here for the express purpose of finding him. Clearly, it was not by some simple coincidence. There must be a reason for it. Layman Yi overestimated my visit. After knowing that Layman Yi is here, little monk was determined to come for a visit, no advice nor intent to instruct to speak of. The monk responded graciously enough. This was rather baffling to Yi Futian. Just a visit? Yi Futian asked again, a little puzzled. That's all. Tianyin Arhat responded with a smile. His eyes still hovered on Yi Futian. However, there seemed to be some curiosity in those clear and profound eyes of his. I don't understand. Would the Grandmaster please elucidate? Yi Futian implored in return deferentially. He was a little curious, too, as to why an Arhat would know of his arrival, and took all the trouble to come for a visit in person. Layman Yi is a person who has a destiny with Buddhism. Tianyin Arhat continued with a smile. What do you mean? Yi Futian asked. Tianyin Arhat glanced at Hua Qingqing next to Yi Futian, pointing at her. Yi Futian looked a little surprised and asked, Did the Grandmaster detect something? Tianyin Arhat shook his head and smiled. Little monk can't see anything. I only know that Layman Yi has a destiny with Buddhism. Perhaps. Yi Futian just smiled.